Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Johnson, back with you again for session 6 of our 20-plus session series on the power of virtue. Today, what I'd like to be talking about, or what we will be talking about, is virtue and your two inner voices. Did you know you have more than one inner voice? You know, the inner observer and the inner talker. Have you ever said to yourself, so, I said to myself, well, who's talking to who inside of you? Who is this self? I said to myself. There's the I, and then there's this thing called the self. What's going on here? Well, let's take a look. Theological writers and thinkers over the centuries, Thomas Merton included among them, have long maintained that we have at least two inner voices. We have, on the one hand, what theologians and writers would call the God self, or the true self, and we have on the other side what might be called the false self, or psychologists would call it the ego self. Two voices talking to you at different times. What's the difference? Well, what I call the true self voice is speaking to you of goodness, truth, beauty, and goodness. It speaks to you of what is good, fair, lovely, and of love out there. We call them, in this series, virtues. So your true self is talking to you about virtue. It's saying kindness, it's saying wisdom, it's saying simplicity, it's saying transcendence, and it's trying to teach you all of this interiorly. As you might imagine, this false self, or the ego self voice, doesn't speak to you about virtue. It speaks to you of shadows and compulsions. Shadows are the absence of virtue, and compulsions are the distortion of virtue. So, two voices speaking very different languages to you, right within inside of you. I can say to you without question that you are happiest, healthiest, and holiest when you listen to the true self voice, because you're listening to truth, beauty, and goodness. Now, we know the world doesn't always speak in truth, beauty, and goodness, but as we move along in our spiritual maturation, it is us. If God has been given to you, we are supposed to be giving it out to the world. And how do we do that? Well, we show truth, beauty, and goodness. And by speaking the language of the true self, that is the language of virtue, that's exactly what we're doing. And in the process, we are happier. So prayer is, our personality rather, is your very own interior mechanism for accessing these virtues strengths, as I like to call them here. So, and your personality is doing this all the time. Well, how does it do it? How does your personality communicate virtue out to yourself and out into the world? Well, to answer that question, I will say that your personality has 6 functions that it is performing all the time. We're really not aware of the fact that our personality is doing all this work, but it is. So let's take a look at each one of these. So the first function of your personality is called the believing function. Do you have any beliefs? What are your beliefs about money, or government, or church, or for that matter, personality or virtue? You have beliefs in there, and these beliefs are things that you take for certain. These are certainties for you. I have a prayer for you that I'd like to recite. I wrote this just for you. Lord, help me come to believe, truly believe, that you have deeply blessed me with specific and special virtues that animate my soul and give authentic light and healing power to my life. Now, as this new knowing unfolds in me, I can offer no other response but to use and spread out these virtues, to sow these virtues, these seeds of virtue, into my own heart and into the good people in this world that you bring me in contact with. Well, that's a nice little prayer, and it's asking God to help me do that. But, well, what is the virtue in my believing function? Well, I've taken my own instrument, the Spiritual Strengths Profile, and I'd love to have you take it too, because you learn so much about your spiritual personality there. But my virtue strength, my premier signature virtue strength in my believing function is the virtue of hope. So what does that mean for me? Well, it means that in my belief core, which is actually the operating system of my brain, I'm basically optimistic. I basically think the best. I expect the best. I'm not looking for what's wrong. I'm looking for what's right. I have hope. The definition of hope is the absolute assurance that the power of love can never be eclipsed. Isn't that a beautiful definition? Now, hope has a shadow. The absence of hope. What is that? Despair. Hopelessness. Well, if I have a choice between believing in hope and having my beliefs activated by despair, which one do you think I want to choose? Can I be intentional enough to be able to choose that? As I get moved over closer to despair, like with disappointment, dejection, etc., all the D words, then maybe I'm not living a very happy life. And then there's the compulsion of hope, which is which is presumption. Presumption, what does that have to do with hope? Well, hope invests in prayer and invests your life in Christ. Presumption is just in the world, where it's saying, oh, don't worry about that, no problem there. Or, my wife will always love me. Or there'll always be food on the table. Oh, there'll always be enough for this. I don't have to worry about that right now. You're presuming rather than moving actively, believing actively with the virtue of hope. The second function is the perceiving function. This is where I practice awareness. We all practice awareness. We see things. We perceive things. We take in data all the time. This is the perceiving function of the personality. Well, my spiritual strength there in this is simplicity. What is simplicity? Allowing you to see the fullness of something, the essence of something. What is the essence of something? Well, it usually gets down to something quite spiritual. What is the shadow of simplicity? Complexity. What happens when your life has more complexity? Usually more anxiety. Is that bringing you closer to God or moving you away from God? I think the answer is pretty obvious. The shadow of simplicity is a thing called bluntedness. Oh, don't worry about that. It's kind of an extension of presumption here, where you can be very curt and very short with people. Oh, what are you doing that for? Why is that about? Well, that's not, you're trying to make things as simple as possible, but that's not the virtue of simplicity. And being simplistic is not simplicity either. The next function of the personality is the thinking function. Here's the prayer I wrote for the thinking function. Lord, help me grasp the truth that your virtue-driven thinking enlightens my heart and soul. Lord, repair my broken judgment and realize that you have indeed given me the spiritual tools, that is, my 6 signature virtue strengths, required to do my part in a broken world. It's at this holy moment when I have no other response but to begin transforming all my broken thoughts to your virtuous thoughts. My spiritual strength here in the thinking function is wisdom. I didn't create that. That's been given to me. I only found that out when I took this instrument, which is statistically sound, reliable, and valid, and all of those things that psychometrics can help us look at. It passed all those tests. It's a good instrument. It gives you a lot of data. It gives you a 19-page printout of what your personality is about. Of course, I urge you to take it. I'm trying to spread wisdom, and I think that does that. The shadow of wisdom is incompetence, inadequacy. I'm not enough. And its compulsion is, this is a bad one for me, perfectionism. Always trying more and more and more and more. The next function, the fourth function of your personality, is the feeling function. Every time you have a thought, guess what happens? You have a reaction to that thought in an emotion. And if you're having critical thoughts, guess what kind of emotions you have? If you're having loving thoughts, guess what kind of emotions you have? You guessed it. You got it right. Where would you rather be? Would you rather be in the critical mode or the loving mode? Would you rather be criticizing yourself? I don't think so. I don't think so. The next is the fifth of the 6 functions is the deciding function. And this is where we make choices. We decide on options. We make to-do lists. We create schedules. We have a game plan. All of this is under the deciding function of the personality. My gifted virtue strength in the deciding function of the personality is transcendence, where, we are in the world, but we're not of the world. And when we say we're not of the world, that means there's a part of our being that is actually on the spiritual realm, not the physical or psychological realm. It's up here. So while we deal with the physical realm and obviously have a psychological parts to us, we are also moving in a transcendent way that is on the spiritual realm. The shadow of transcendence is worldliness, only being in the world and only thinking and deciding as the world would decide, which you have to at times. I mean, we all have to be worldly. We are in the world after all. But its compulsion is unreality, fanciful thinking that I can do anything or this can happen. What? No, we have to live in this world as we are in this world. The final and 6th function of your personality is the action function, where we actually perform behavior. We do something. My spiritual strength in this function is inspiration. People who have the gift of inspiration, I have learned, are people who like to inspire other people and who like to be inspired. They like to raise themselves or be raised by this virtue power above this world. The shadow is called lifelessness or deadenedness, having just being inert rather. And the compulsion is the seeking diversion and excitement. It's going to be wonderful, wonderful, wonderful around here. Well, that's not inspiration. Inspiration is when your heart is moved. You may be moved to tears. You may be moved to gratitude. You may be moved to any of the virtues here. So this is a very short course on the personality. I'll be talking about personality with regard to virtue, I think, in a lot of the series, the sections that are coming up in this series called The Power of Virtue. Thanks for listening today. I'll look forward to being with you again. God bless.